Dame Harriett Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Rochdale, and I'll be picking up on some of the points that he makes later in my remarks, but I just want to start by characterising the whole budget in the way that we heard from our front bench, which is that this was the nightmare before Christmas budget, because we saw after last year's Halloween budget another budget that has come back for more and more tax on the strivers, the entrepreneurs, the hard workers, the pensioners across our land. And so in the scrutiny of the budget that we do on the Treasury Select Committee, we will be trying to draw out some of these decisions that the Chancellor announced yesterday from the dispatch box. Because it's clear that last year's Halloween budget was the biggest tax-raising budget in the history of the UK, and yesterday's budget was the third biggest tax-raising budget in the history of the UK. So it is quite an enormous burden that we have put on our country. And what we are seeing in terms of the run-up to the budget was also quite extraordinary. The fact that the Office for Budget Responsibility report leaked during Prime Minister's questions, Madam Deputy Speaker, you will be aware that the Chairman of Ways and Means was rightly outraged on behalf of Parliament. And I just want to outline for the benefit of the House the role that the Treasury Select Committee plays in terms of the Office for Budget Responsibility. We've got them in front of the committee on Tuesday. We received a letter today which has been publicised from the Chief Executive, Richard Hughes, outlining the fact that he's undergoing an investigation. But the House may not be aware that actually the appointment of all three senior members of the Office for Budget Responsibility and, importantly, the dismissal of any of those three members is something that has a veto from the Treasury Select Committee. That is written into legislation and may not be something that everybody is aware of. And so we take our responsibility incredibly seriously to get to the bottom of what happened here, because I think on behalf of Parliament we have got to find out what happened. But there was such a lot of skullduggery happening, frankly, in the run-up to this budget. All of these kites being flown by the Treasury, possibly speculation by the media, but all of these ideas culminating on the morning of the 4th of November, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the Chancellor breaking into the nation's breakfast with her doom-laden pronouncements about the upcoming budget. Quite extraordinary and unprecedented, rightly the subject of an urgent question by my right honourable friend. And then, after that, Madam Deputy Speaker, we then had a story in the Financial Times on the evening of November the 13th, which moved the gilt market the minute it opened on the morning of the 14th, about the decision not to proceed with an income tax switch with national insurance. Quite extraordinary skullduggery has been going on somewhere in the Treasury, and I hope that when the Treasury Minister responds to this debate later, that he can clarify what the situation is as far as the instructions that the Chancellor has given to the Permanent Secretary to do a full skullduggery investigation of the Treasury, not just a leak inquiry, but something quite significantly more widespread has happened in the run-up to this budget that I don't think we can accept as a Parliament. I think we need to draw a line in terms of this behaviour, and we really need to get to the bottom of how apparently the Chancellor herself has said to Labour backbenchers that this was the rabbit that she was going to pull out of the hat at the dispatch box yesterday, that she wasn't going to have to increase income tax. Some of the briefing that the Treasury spokespeople did after this leak to the Financial Times was around the fact that the OBR had improved its economic forecasts. Well, we saw in their document yesterday that they hadn't changed their main economic forecast since the 31st of October. So that can't be right either. So there has been some unbelievable I'm going to call it leaking or briefing or just skullduggery seems to sum it up, from Treasury special advisors, and the role of the Office for Budget Responsibility in this has been very much tainted. But we take our responsibility as a committee incredibly seriously as far as the independence on behalf of Parliament of the Office for Budget Responsibility. Now, turning to the actual measures in the budget, I do want to highlight a couple of them. The first one is to do with productivity. And both frontbenchers, I think, mentioned productivity and the importance of us focusing on productivity, the impact that the downward revision in productivity had on the Office for Budget Responsibility's forecasts. But everyone knows that in this country, the private sector has continued to become more productive. And the public sector, both in the last Parliament and around the pandemic in particular, got very much exacerbated. Public sector productivity has still not recovered to the kinds of levels that we had before the pandemic. There is some incredible productivity scarring in our public sector, and I think it would be welcome if the Minister from the dispatch box later could outline how the government plans to tackle public sector productivity. If it returned to pre-pandemic levels in the National Health Service, for example, it would be worth a £20 billion. Possibly all the tax rises in yesterday's budget could have been removed if we got to that level of productivity again. I don't think it's helping productivity that NHS doctors were given a nearly 30% pay rise with no requirement for them not to strike again. I don't think that the decisions that the government has been making really align with getting better productivity out of our public sector. But I'm sure the Minister, when he replies at the end of the debate, will be able to elaborate on that. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I may, to pick up on the very powerful speech that the Honourable Member opposite made about child poverty in Rochdale. And he will be aware that over the last 14 years, that absolute poverty for children, not in his constituency but across the country in aggregate, did fall. And I think that was largely down to higher employment, but also, importantly, more help with childcare. And I think those are important things to focus on as well in terms of the ability to work and the ability to earn more. But we asked experts last week at the Treasury Committee what the child poverty line is in this country, and I think it's just important for the House to understand what's happening here in terms of the figures that we then got back from the Institute for Fiscal Studies. For a household with 2 children and 2 adults, after they've paid all their taxes and housing costs, the answer for the relative poverty line, we're talking about relative poverty, which is what the Minister mentioned earlier, that is £24,650 a year. So that's the relative poverty line for a household with 2 children and 2 adults. For a household with 3 children and 2 adults, again, after they've paid their taxes and their housing costs, the answer is £28,176. So I think we need to just recognise, Madam Deputy Speaker, that in the budget yesterday, that there will be many people caught by the tax rises in the budget who have much lower incomes than that. There will be widowers. I will give way. May I just make this first point? Widowers who have perhaps a small widow's pension, who will pay more tax because of the decisions that were announced in yesterday's budget. I give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Ladies, thank you very much for giving way. I have a lot of respect for record in government and also as Select Committee Chair. But does she accept that actually, she talks about tax rises, that the bulk of the tax rises, this Parliament, 4 out of 5 years, are Tory tax rises through the threshold that she and her other colleagues voted for, the free?
Harriett Baldwin. Actually, I'm talking about yesterday's budget. Yesterday's budget, the Chancellor herself announced that she was freezing those thresholds for a further 3 years. And he will be asked to vote in the division lobbies next week for those, I dare say. So no, there are 3 additional years that the Chancellor has just announced. Another person who will pay more tax as a result of the decisions the Chancellor herself announced is a single young person on minimum wage. They will have to pay more tax as a result of this budget. I don't know if honourable members have seen the emigration statistics that were published today, and that hundreds of thousands of our young people are fleeing this country at the moment. And that is something that we should all be very concerned about. A single mother who has just received perhaps a lump sum in a divorce settlement will pay more tax as a result of this budget. A sole trader, an entrepreneur who runs a business, perhaps pays themselves in dividends, they will pay more tax as a result of the budget yesterday. A driver in my rural constituency who needs to drive to go to work will pay more tax because of the budget yesterday. So I think we can see, Madam Deputy Speaker, the choices that the Chancellor made punished those who are the employers, the farmers, the family businesses, the workers, the savers, the pensioners, the drivers, everyone who tries to do the right thing and not be a burden on the state. And I leave the House with one final point. I'm looking forward to his wind-ups at the end of the debate, and I will not give way at the moment. But I would like to say that in terms of the skullduggery that the Treasury seems to have created during the run-up to this budget, that the lingering impression of this budget will be one where the spectre of further tax hikes looms, and the floating of the income tax idea, the floating of all the other tax ideas, all of those taxes will come back like a ghoul in budgets to come. Thank you very much.